Transformers, The Secret Wars Chapter 1, Trypticon Station. Outside of Trypticon Station, the emergency lights flashed on and off as the Decepticon cruiser moved towards Trypticon Station, taking heavy fire from the station's defenses and the Autobot flyers circling around the ship. We've lost power to one of the main engines, Barricade said to Megatron, who was sitting in the commander's seat. Make that 2 engines offline. They shot them out, sir. Brawl yelled. Vortex. Megatron screamed as he was shouting orders to some of the crew, send Scropinox out to fix the engines. Yes, sir, he responded and left the console he was sitting at. Sir, we have enemy dropships heading into the hangar. A Decepticon drone warned, looking over his shoulder to the leader of the Decepticons. Scorcher, take your team and go to the hangar, he barked, destroy those Autobots. Sir, consider it done. The soldier named Scorcher replied, walking toward the intercom. Alpha Team, Selena, AMY, and Wrench, report to the bridge. He ordered on the loudspeaker. A few seconds later, they were at his side and they ran towards the lift that led to the hangar. Selena pulled out her datapad and told Scorcher what he needed to know. Sir, I have intelligence that Soundwave and Shockwave need our support down there. They were able to take down 5 light runners, 2 tanks, and a whole lot of drones. We also have intel that, she paused as she looked at her datapad, Blade is down there. Alpha Squad, sound off. Scorcher barked, taking into consideration that an old enemy was threatening the people he was working for. AMY, reporting sir. AMY said. Selena, reporting, she answered as she stowed her datapad away. Wrench, ready to turn some Autobots into scrap metal. The rookie's voice was filled with enthusiasm. All right, we're all here. Weapons ready. Scorcher ordered, said, pulling out his 2 plasma hand cannons, which he was most notorious for using in every battle. Selena pulled out a small energy pistol, A.M.Y, being a mechanically modified super weapon, pulled out a plasma dispenser, and Wrench pulled out a neutral assault rifle. Wrench was the brand new engineer of the team, since all of their other engineers kept dying, and they hoped that he did not perish on his first field mission. The lift doors opened, and the team entered. When they arrived in the hangar, they were bombarded with laser fire, one hitting Wrench straight in his processor. The other 3 took cover behind a nearby Autobot dropship that crashed to avoid joining Wrench. Damn, this was his first time being out of the training room. Scorcher screamed. Selena, where are the waves? She pulled out an info pad, pressed a few buttons, and answered. They are above us, sir, she said, pointing up. Open a channel. Scorcher commanded. There was static on the intercom, trying to connect to Shockwave. Then, they hear his voice on the airwaves. Commander, glad you can make it? Soundwave tells me that there are more dropships coming toward the Overlord. We patched in on their frequency. They won't stop until Blade retreats, he explained. Well, let us give him a reason to leave. Scorcher said, putting away his hand cannons, and pulling out his 2 swords, which have seen much destruction. You 2 keep them distracted. Keep their fire on your location. I'll sneak around back and kill his other partner. Scorcher explained his plan. Yes, sir, they said, shooting at all of the Autobots in their sights. They stopped shooting around and focused their fire at the 2 members of Alpha Squad. Scorcher managed to sneak around the side, behind the debris that filled the hangar. Blade was firing randomly between the 2 positions, while his smaller ally was just shooting the air around the 2 spots. Yeah, Decepticons. You want to take over the universe, you have to go through me. He yelled, wasting his ammo. Scorcher casually walked up behind the whelp, preparing to cut the Autobot in 2. He violently thrusts his blades into the torso of the Autobot and tore him apart. Blade looked back to see his ally dead. Looks like we'll be taking over. Scorcher let out a quick quip before focusing on his nemesis, Blade. Blade, get over here. Scorcher yelled as walking to him, putting his swords together, making a large double-edged sword. Well, Captain Scorcher, we meet again. How's your home? He asked, hoping that mentioning one of his past failures would send him into a rage. You know how it is? You burned it to the ground. He screamed, pain filling his voice. He ran toward him, his blade raised to strike true. He pulled out his 2 blades prepared to block Scorcher's strike. The 2 swung, their blades colliding. Scorcher proceeded to push down to try and break Blade's block, but Blade simply smiled as he shoved Scorcher back. The 2 swung at each other for a bit until Blade got bored and decided to give up. He flew out of the hangar and back to his ship, which departed shortly after he returned. You coward? Come back here. Scorcher yelled, his voice still filled with anger and pain. AMY came out from behind the gunship and stood next to him. Well, at least they stopped attacking. She commented. I know. Tell Soundwave and Shockwave that he can come down. Scorcher said, looking at one of the Decepticon drones and then at an Autobot troop. They looked so different, yet have the same heritage. Cybertronian were made on Cybertron, and they made the drones as a workforce. When the war started, Megatron decided to use them as soldiers, cannon fodder, and the Autobots chose to use real Cybertronian, having feelings for the sparkless beings. Drones are basically nothing compared to true Cybertronians. Commander, Shockwave, reporting. He said. How many drones did we lose? Scorcher asked. About 50. Blade and his men killed a lot of our troops. Go back to the bridge, I'll catch up later. Yes, sir. He said, making his leave from the wrecked hangar. Selena, AMY, go back to your quarters. Scorcher ordered. Yes, sir, they said, making their leave as well. Soundwave, get a cleanup crew down here. As you wish, Commander, he said. Scorcher started walking back to the bridge. He returned to the bridge, and Megatron was piloting the ship straight to Trypticon station. Megatron, what are you doing? Scorcher asked, running up to the mad Cybertronian. I want that dark energon? Starscream is being too persistent. Ram this warship into the heart of that station, the crazy Khan ordered. They crashed right in the center of that station, knocking Scorcher out. He woke up in a sector of the station with what was left of his team. Is everyone alright? He asked his troops. He looked around and noticed that he had 7 drones with him as well. I'm fine. A.M.Y replied. I'm also functional. Scorcher heard Selena comment. Alright, let us meet up with Megatron in the command room of the station. Scorcher commanded, starting to walk towards the closest door. The door slid open, and they were introduced by about 100 Autobot guards. It's a trap. Scorcher yelled as he ran behind the door wall, right out of the frying pan, and into the fire. A.M.Y said, pulling out the plasma dispenser. Tear them down? Troops, take cover, let AMY handle this. Scorcher ordered. She let the barrels spin and took all of the guards down. Hundreds of Autobot pieces flying all over the place. Alright, we're clear, she said. They started to walk deeper in the station. Sir, most of these storage units are thousands of years old. The content probably isn't good anymore. Selena said, scanning a container. Megatron plans to fix that. He told her. They ran toward the service lift that led to the control room. Commander, Soundwave reporting. Megatron already went after Starscream in the command room. I've reactivated the station's systems. Soundwave said on the intercom. Good. We'll meet with him there. Scorcher replied. If he doesn't end up killing himself in the process. Selena said. They ran for the command room. Megatron showed them the way with all of the wreckage and Autobot bodies. They finally found the command room, but Starscream's corpse wasn't on the ground. Sir, he ran away. Scorcher asked, holstering his weapons. No, Scorcher, even better. He joined us in our cause. Megatron said, grinning. Scorcher, gather all of your troops and return to the base on Cybertron. Yes, sir. He replied, saluting him. He then turned to AMY and Selena. Alright, Alpha Squad, let's roll out. He transformed into a Cybertronian plane, as did the other two. They flew out of the viewpoint facing the planet, heading home. Chapter 2, The Recruit. When Scorcher and his squad got back to their base, they transformed and walked towards their barracks. Once inside, they began to remove the weaponry they had currently equipped, placing them in weapon lockers. Selena looked over her shoulder to Scorcher. Sir, when are we going to go and get Blade? Selena asked, holding the info tab. Soon, Selena, soon, he replied, holding his 2 swords. I just hope we can get a new engineer soon. We need him. Then, as if he had heard him, Cyclonus, the well-known Decepticon medic, came through the door. Alright, Alpha Squad, here's your new engineer. He stepped to the side and allowed a scrawny-looking Khan to enter. The 3 looked to him, then to Cyclonus. Meet Trouble, fresh out of the training room and ready to go out on the field. Then he chuckled, have fun. Scorcher looked to the recruit, closing his locker and facing the newbie. So, Trouble, how long have you been training to be an engineer? Well, sir, I've been training for about, since Wrench was assigned to this unit. He answered. Scorcher shook his head. He looked back to Trouble. Well, that's very informative. What are you trained for? I'm an engineer, sir. I can fix any machinery and make sure your gear is working at 100%. He begins to be more lively and less shy. AMY looked at him, an expression of doubt on her metallic face. What kind of weapons ya got? Trouble looked to her, his mouth slightly drooping, before he shook himself back to reality and pulled out his 2 weapons. I got an EMP shotgun, pretty good for tearing down Autobots, but I also have a neutral assault rifle, for range. He shows off his 2 weapons. AMY nods, turning away. Nice kit, kid. Well, welcome to Alpha Squad. I'm Scorcher, the team leader. This here is Selena, our half-medic half-intelligence soldier. And last, but not least, AMY, our heavy weapons specialist. Good with all kinds of explosives and weapons. I presume that you're our new bot. Scorcher returned his gaze to the new bot. Yes, sir. They grabbed about 5 of us engineers. They have 4 extra troops just like me ready for me to die. Whoa, Rook, I don't have an overall plan in my locker about how to have my next engineer get killed, though that would be ironic. Scorcher chuckled at his own little joke. Sir, that's not funny. AMY replied. Too many men have died on our team. Yeah, but not because of me. Remember Boombot, how he died, which was a default feature. Only problem was that he didn't have the reassemble feature, like they did on the Iron Golem models. Man, I miss those drones. I wonder what happened to those guys. Sir, AMY shouts at the wandering leader. Sorry about him, Trouble. He can drone on if he gets the opportunity. How about I show you around and teach you the basics? Sure, you can show me around, he said, walking with AMY out of the room. Scorcher waited for the door to close, and then turned to Selena, digging for information. Selena, tell me about our new recruit, he asked, Selena looking at her datapad. Well, he transforms mostly into heavy vehicles, like tanks and trucks, but yeah, he can change into other things as well. He is a specialist at fixing things and building things out of spare parts, and trained to survive a fight. Other than that, though, that's the detail we have on him, she said. Scorcher nods. Well, I'm going to go and rest for a little bit until we have to go on our next mission. If anyone needs me, just tell them to use the intercom, he said, going towards his charge station. Yes, sir. I'll just be up in CIC rearranging our forces, repositioning our defenses, and resupplying our troops on the field, Selena said, leaving our quarters and heading to the peak of this tower. Scorcher sat in the charging station, closing his eyes and drifting into a simulation of his past. Chapter 3, Old Allies, Dark Times. While Scorcher began to recharge his cells, he dreamed of what it was like in the old times. Everyone was peaceful. There was no war, only the great vast unexplored space. Hell, Scorcher himself was just a civilian until the war. Optimus and Megatron, or Galvatron, as he had called himself before going mad, were friends, and everything was peaceful. The only thing Cybertron needed to worry about were bandits, Cybertronians gone crazy. Scorcher lived in a peaceful village out on the Cybertronian plains, where energon was farmed and sold to Starcream, the commander of Cybertron's navy. Scorcher's old friend, Train Trek, lived there and worked with him so they could make the currency their village required. Scorcher, why is it that you decided to move out to this part of Cybertron instead of staying in the cities? Train asked as he set up an energon pump to an energon tanker. Well, the political activity was really getting to me, so I just moved out here to help the farms. Scorcher replied, activating the pump. The raw pure energon that came from the lakes in the canyon below was now flowing up the tube, into the tanker they had just set up. Well, it's good to know that there are still people who can still do the good work. People in the cities have no idea where their energy comes from, and without us, things would go into complete chaos, he said, walking away from the pipe and towards Scorcher. Scorcher turned his head, looking off in the distance. He heard a light rumble coming from the empty plains. He focused and saw a group of raiders coming towards the village. He noticed the colors they wore and saw that it was the infamous Blades, ran by a despicable Cybertronian known as Blade. Give us the darkness. Scorcher heard Blade yell. The rest of his men followed him with a war cry. Train, defensive positions. Scorcher yelled, running towards the village. We're being attacked. He nodded and ran to the tower. Scorcher ran towards his little tent and pulled out one of his revolvers, Vengeance. He then walked out of the tent, twirling his weapon, watching as the civilians ran to their homes. Scorcher gripped firmly onto the handle and took aim, focusing on his target. He fired a shot, and one of the raiders fell. They then jumped out of their alt modes, and began running, weapons drawn. Scorcher pulled out a blade of his own, one that was handed down to him from an old friend, and began to battle the Blades. They love to use swords made from the people they killed. Beasts, I'll kill you all, Scorcher shouted, cutting through Blades and firing his pistols when presented the opportunity. Train Trek came out, carrying a large warhammer, smashing more Blades. The Blades were a large group of raiders, taking in any Cybertronian that had gone mad. Nobody had been able to figure out what had caused the madness that afflicted the Blades, but it continued to spread. Train Trek and Scorcher continued to fight the group of Blades until there was only one left, Blade. He laughed as he pulled out a second blade. The village only has you two pathetic losers to protect it? Ha, he twirled his swords, ready to spill energon. Train Trek looked to Scorcher, raising his hammer. Just like our ancestors used to fight. He grinned. Scorcher nodded, holstering his pistol and pulling out the second half of his sword. He clasped the hilts together and the two became one. Scorcher then changed his footing, prepared to attack Blade. Chapter 4, Rescuing Private Trouble. Scorcher, wake up, and report to the command. Starscream shouted over the intercom. In the empty bunk room, the annoying voice echoed, and Scorcher, being rudely awakened, groaned. He got up from his charging station and unplugged, sitting up on his bed. Scorcher, command, now. The voice repeated itself, and once again, he groaned. All right. Scorcher got up, stretching. He looked to his plating, seeing the scratches and burn marks. The red metal shone and the purple Decepticon insignia glowing brightly. Once he finished loosening up, he walked out of the team's recharge bunk when he heard the annoying voice once more, this time throughout the entire base. Scorcher to command, now. Scorcher let out an aggravated growl. I heard ya the first time. Scorcher shouted up into the sky, picking up the pace and closing the distance between himself and the command center. He ran past a number of well-known Decepticons, such as Brawl, Barricade, and Ramjet, all of which ignored him, focusing on their own duties. He finally reached the command room, seeing Selena and Starscream. Before he walked in, Selena ran up to Scorcher, holding him back for a minute. Trouble and AMY are not anywhere on base. Last I saw, Trouble's transponder was somewhere in Zion. Starscream wants to see our new recruit in action and send us on a mission. Selena explained, putting her data pad away. Scorcher nodded, and cleared his voice module, catching Starscream's attention. Starscream turned around and grinned. Ah, the fearless leader of Alpha Squad. He took a moment and looked around. Scorcher knew exactly who he was looking for. Where's AMY and Trouble? I would have expected them to be with you, Scorcher. Scorcher sighed, and Selena walked up. They're not here. She paused and took a step back, preparing for Starscream's wrath, or his annoyance. Scorcher believed it to be. What? You lost them? He raised his finned hands into the air, looking to Selena. Scorcher stood between him and his comrade, blocking Starscream. No, we didn't lose them. Last we knew, they were in the city of Dezion. We can go there now and retrieve them, he suggested, knowing Starscream would waste time sending his competitor for second in command into the heart of an Autobot city. Fine, you can go. Find your engineer. Do not fail us, Scorcher, Starscream said, secretly hoping that he would, indeed, fail. Scorcher nodded, walking away. Selena followed closely behind, checking her neutron assault rifle. Let's go find them, he said, transforming into a car as the two left the base. After some time, Scorcher and Selena made it to where Trouble and AMY were supposed to be. It was a fancy Iacon parlor run by a friendly Autobot named Nitrogen. The two Decepticons walked in, and everything in the parlor went silent. The two ignored the unwanted attention and walked up to Nitrogen. Nitrogen shook his head. Hell nah, Scorch, not today. This Autobot know you? Selena asked Scorcher, who shook his head. Old-time acquaintance was all Scorcher gave her. He turned his attention back to Nitrogen. Did two other Decepticons come here earlier? One looking like he was fresh off the processor, the other looking like she had some work done. I don't know, what's it to you? Nitrogen went back to doing what he was doing before, wiping down the counter. Scorcher then pulled out a small device, and Nitrogen panicked. Why yeah, they stopped by. Ordered a couple's deal. Looked harmless enough, so I sold to them? Please don't use that. I enjoy being sane again. He began to cower behind the counter, then Scorcher put the device away. Thank you for the intel. Scorcher then walked out, Selena following him. The hell was that? Nothing important. I thought you said they were on a mission, Scorcher said, walking out of the parlor. Selena rubbed the back of her neck. It was. Then they got carried away, Selena replied, turning to face Scorcher. Scorcher shook his head, then looked around. Go ahead and scan the area, he ordered. Selena complied, looking around. She stopped then knelt down, pointing out a line of cyber blood, streaked towards a dark alley. The two walked over, seeing a slumped figure. It was Trouble. Scorcher ran up to him, checking him for any wounds. Trouble, are you alright? Attacked, took, A.M.Y. He replied weakly, pointing into the alley. Scorcher growled, sensing an old and annoying enemy. Selena, stay with Trouble, mend any damages. Scorcher pulled out his revolvers, Vengeance, and Justice. I'm gonna get AMY. She simply nods, kneeling down to Trouble. Scorcher then entered the alley, checking any spot the assaulter would hide. After seeing nothing, he stopped. Where the hell dash? He was cut off when he was hit in the back of the head. He fell to the ground, groaning in pain. He turned over to see his assaulter. The one holding AMY, he could not see, but he could clearly see Blade's crazy ass any day of the cycle. Looking for someone? Blade asked sadistically, shoving a blade into Scorcher's left arm, pinning him. Not paying any attention, however, he allowed Scorcher to raise his other arm, placing the barrel of Vengeance directly against the side of his head. A moment later, Scorcher pulled the trigger, Blade's head disassembling into multiple pieces. Should have done that eons ago, you crazy bot, Scorcher said. He then saw the other Autobot injure AMY and run away. Scorcher then passed out once more, seeing Selena running up to him before he shut down. Chapter 5, Past Duel. Scorcher returned to his dream, right before he and Train Track were about to fight Blade. Their village was in flames, white smoke rising from the buildings. The villagers who had survived left, and the rest of Blade's crew that had come with him were dead. All that remained in the village were Blade, Scorcher, and Train Track. You'll die here, in the middle of nowhere. No one will look for you, Blade sadistically said, twirling his blades. Even after his death, Blade would continue to haunt Scorcher in his dreams. His psychotic laugh, his disturbing face, his sadistic personality had engraved itself into Scorcher's core. I can think of a few, but the only thing is that what you just said is false. It will be you that will be stranded out here, left to rot. Train Track shouted, twirling his hammer, then suddenly grasping it and rushing Blade. Blade focused his attention on the impending mass of Cybertronian that ran towards him. Trek raised his hammer, prepared to strike the filth down, when Blade crossed his blades, stopping the weapon. Scorcher then jumped into action, running up from behind. He jumped, his sword raised high in the air. Blade moved his swords and body so Trek's hammer fell to the ground, creating a loud gong noise as it struck the metal floor. He then twisted himself and blocked Scorcher's weapon with one sword, metal grinding against metal. You're not getting away this time, Blade. You will answer for your crimes, Scorcher shouted, grunting as he pressed down on his own blade, causing pressure to build up. All Blade did was laugh, quickly dodging Scorcher's blade as it came down. He maneuvered and swung a blade at Scorcher's side, managing to cut off a few plates, blue fluid spritzing out of the wound. Scorcher growled, swinging his sword where Blade was standing. The crazy bot jumped away, laughing hysterically as he did so. He laughed, but did not pay any mind to the hammer that was almost at its target. Blade turned his head before being flung into an already damaged building, the structure collapsing around Blade. Scorcher got up and stood next to Train Track, raising his fist. Track bumped it. The two approached the pile of slag, moving pieces that still could be moved. Once they cleared the area Blade should have been buried under, they were ready to take him in. But Blade's body was gone, and there were no tracks. Damn, must have gotten a custom job on his alt form. Make it untraceable, Scorcher said, turning to Train Track, who morphed the hammer back into his own body. Scorcher did the same with his blade, the weapon retreating back into its owner through the hand that held it. That's the third time this cycle. You'd think he'd remember how many times we kicked his butt. Train Trek jokingly commented, walking away. Come on. Let's get this energon out of here before he shows up again. He entered the rig, starting the engine. Scorcher climbed on top, sitting on the roof. Scorcher looked down to his friend, whose fist was raised. Brothers till the end. Scorcher raised his fist as well. Brothers till the end. The rig began to move, heading towards the city, and Scorcher's vision began to blur, wondering how long he was out of commission. Chapter 6, Troublesome Reunion. Scorcher woke up in the back of a transport, laying down on the metal seat. His optic receptors flickered a few times, adjusting to the light. You're finally awake. A feminine voice to his left stated. Scorcher sat up, looking to the owner of the voice. The voice belonged to a con known as Flam War, a spec ops soldier for the Decepticons. Scorcher rubbed his head, thinking that he had heard those specific words from somewhere before, but shrugged it off. Specialist Flam War, a pleasure to see you. I assume Selena, AMY, and Trouble are with us as well. Scorcher inquired, shifting himself to sit normally. He looked to his left and saw the 3 Cybertronians, AMY, and Trouble leaning on one another as they rested. Selena looked at Scorcher, a faint smile spread on her metal lips. Scorcher then looked back to the specialist. So, I assume you didn't just run into the city by yourself. I mean, the city was considered neutral territory, since most of the non-combatants fled there, but Autobots and Decepticons that are deemed too dangerous are forbidden to enter. Which made Scorcher wonder why the guards even allowed Blade to enter, but the crazy bot was gone now, so he shrugged it off. I did not enter. I hired 2 mercs to help me transport you and your team back to Angmar. She replied, looking to the head of whatever they were riding. Before them were 2 Cybertronians, one with a white main body with red and yellow accents, similar to an Autobot. The other, who was holding the controls to whatever mechanical beast pulled this thing, was a black bot with splashes of green and purple, more akin to a Decepticon. The 2 looked back, and Scorcher could at least tell who one of the mercs were. Lockdown. Scorcher was slightly shocked to see the con Lockdown grunted and looked away, focusing back on the road. Wait a minute, you're supposed to be dead. I was dead. That psycho Blade made sure of that. But a neutral somehow brought me back. Once the Decepticons thought I was dead, and he looked to the side, presumably back at Zion. I found my sparkmate there. Someone to protect. She means more to me than what I used to believe. The ex-con then focused back on the road ahead. Scorcher didn't know what to say, only turning to Selena for a moment. He watched her study her datapad, going through different files. She was probably trying to figure out what was pulling the vehicle, whether it was the alt form of some Cybertronian or an actual beast. Scorcher smiled and turned back to the front, looking at the Autobot-looking merc. I'm not sure who you are. You appear to be an Autobot, but I know some Cybertronians just have similar color schemes. Who might you be? Scorcher asked. The second merc looked back, a grin on his face. The name's Deadlock. I actually don't know a whole lot about my past, but I'm interested in joining your cause. That's actually the only reason Lockdown is here. If I wasn't, we wouldn't have gotten this far. I bought this card off of him, and he's gonna ditch us about halfway and head back. The merc explained. Scorcher nodded, looking back to Flam War. So, what are you paying them? Scorcher asked the special ops con. Aside from half their normal fees, Lockdown gets to keep his secret and Deadlock get an interview with Megatron himself. She grins manically, looking to the soon-to-be Decepticon. That initiation should be fun to watch. Scorcher shuddered at how sadistic the specialist was looking at the new recruit. He let the thought pass, and turned his attention to Trouble, who was already almost killed on his first day, as well as putting AMY, one of Scorcher's most trusted allies, in danger. He got up from his seat and approached the troublesome recruit, grabbing him by the shoulders and tossing him off the cart. Both Selena and Flam War stood up, looking at Scorcher in confusion. Trouble had been shaken awake when his boss grabbed him, and yelled as he flew off the cart and onto the metal trail they left behind. AMY woke up when the shoulder she was sleeping on vanished and she hit the seat. Trouble got up and looked around, dazed and slightly confused as to what was happening. He then looked to Scorcher, who had pulled out one of his revolvers and spun the cylinder. I have no use for whelps that get in danger on their first day. I'm surprised you're the one that survived the training. He took aim at his recruit, firing. The recruit quickly dodged it, jumping to the side, the blast hitting the ground behind him, scorching the metal. If you can reach the cart without dying, you can stay. If not, well, then the Sharkticons can feed off your remains. Scorcher fired once more, and Trouble wasted no time dodging the projectile. The recruit began running towards the cart, making sure to not run straight at it and become an easy target. Scorcher grinned, and watched as he almost reached the cart. Trouble reached out to the cart and Scorcher took aim for it, shooting Trouble in the hand. The recruit flinched, but tapped the cart anyway, a hole in his metallic hand now, fluids dripping out. Scorcher grinned at the recruit and holstered his weapon. Well, one thing is for sure. Trouble looked at Scorcher. You're stubborn. He then jumped off the cart himself, transforming into a light form and drove ahead. Chapter 7, Recall. Scorcher reached the Decepticon camp before his group, rolling past the guards and transforming in the headquarters. Starscream looks at Scorcher, a growl coming on his face. Scorcher, is there something you're hiding from us? The newly appointed second in command walked over to him, punching him in the face. Megatron, who was nearby, swiftly slugged Starscream in the middle of his body, denting him slightly and sending him sprawled on the floor, writhing in pain. Remember your place, Starscream. The leader of the Decepticons shouted, growling at the fallen flyer. Megatron turned his attention back to Scorcher, raising his hand to reveal a small sphere. The sphere fit snugly in Megatron's hand, and Scorcher took the orb, looking at it. On the orb was a glowing sigil of a face, but it was neither Autobot or Decepticon. The face appeared to have a square face with rectangular eyes and sharp triangles going down the face, forming a sort of beard. So, he's calling me home, huh? The contract expired, Scorcher said, looking back to Megatron. The expression on the ruler's normally agitated face was one of sorrow, nodding lightly. Yes, old friend. We knew this day was coming. I had just hoped we had defeated the Autobots by now. His face returned to a scowl, turning around as the rest of Scorcher's team entered the area. Selena, AMY, Trouble, Flamwar, and Deadlock walked in, standing behind Scorcher. Scorcher gave one last look to Megatron, who had returned his focus to his maps, trying to figure out his next major move in the war. All right, squad, time to head home, Scorcher said to the three, causing them to become alarmed. As Scorcher left the building, the other three followed, confused beyond comparison. Sir, with all due respect, what do you mean home? We're Decepticons, we're already home. This is our home, Selena shouted, trying to get Scorcher to stop moving so he could explain what he meant. Scorcher stopped, taking a deep breath and turning around. I'll explain everything, but we need to keep going. The boss doesn't exactly like when his agents are late. Scorcher began walking away once more, only leaving more questions for the three to contemplate. Scorcher simply walked through the battle-torn fields outside the city of Angmar, the high plasma burnt walls defending the city from any Autobot assault. Selena, AMY, and Trouble were trailing behind him, all of their metal footsteps echoing throughout the void. Scorcher, could you please start explaining stuff now? Selena pleaded, beginning to droop down with every step. It had been a long and eventful time, and it was a certainty that his teammates would need to recharge soon, lest their sparks extinguish. Luckily, he could feel that their rides were ever so approaching. He stopped, his hands hanging over his holsters, the handles of his revolvers clanking against the back of his hands. He turned around, seeing his squad slagging behind. Take a knee, squad, Scorcher orders as he lowers himself onto the ground, resting on his knees with his head lowered. The other three followed suit, sitting on the ground. All right, I guess it's time to tell the truth. Scorcher looked to his shoulder, where the purple Decepticon sigil began to spark and flicker. The three watched as the triangular face they had known their entire existence popped off their leader, revealing a rectangular face with a triangular chin. Scorcher took a breath and looked at them. I am not a Decepticon. In fact, you three are not Decepticons either. As he says this, their sigils begin to falter and pop off their bodies as well, revealing the same symbol that was on Scorcher. We are a part of a third faction, a major mercenary guild. The Wardens. It was a group established long ago, back before there were Autobots or Decepticons. Their purpose was to keep the peace. However, as time went on, they became more and more irrelevant and began selling their warriors as mercenaries. My brother is actually the leader of the group now, Scorcher said, hearing the sounds of engines in the distance. Wait, you have a brother. Selena jumped up, now feeling re-energized after Scorcher's little story time. New information always perked her up. The noises of the engines grew louder, two unmarked drop ships approaching at high speeds. The drop shops halted just near them and a group of savage-looking bots jumped out. Each had unique-looking face plates, metal lines dropping from their jaws forming facial coverings. Their plating had blue markings, an ancient language, covering it. Scorcher stood up and faced the largest one of the group, carrying a large battle axe on his back. Warlord wants to see you. The large one looks to the three behind him, and your three whelps. He did not wait for Scorcher to reply, simply returning to one of the drop ships. The newcomers slowly do the same, leaving enough space for the four to get on one. Scorcher turned around, seeing that his team had collected themselves during that encounter, and nodded for them to follow. They were heading home. Chapter 8, Wardens of Cybertron. Scorcher watched as the dropship he was in passed over battlefields and dead bots, seeing how much this war has taken from both sides. His squad were besides him, but they were too preoccupied looking at these strange-looking bots, but noticing they had the same sigil they had. Selena looked to Scorcher. We didn't look like these savages, did we? Her comment caused some of the savages to growl at her and speak in an ancient dialect. Scorcher looked back, catching her in the side of his vision. No, you and AMY were always the way you are. Trouble is the only one who wasn't originally a warden. He was a Decepticon, and passed the requirements. He answered, getting a shocked expression from Trouble. Wait, so there was an actual warden that was in your team before the replacements came in? Who were they? He asked, wanting to know the original combat engineer for Scorcher's squad. The team leader looked forward, releasing a heavy sigh. It's been ages, but I still remember her name. It was a simple name, and straight to the point. He paused, turning around completely to face his team. Her name was Tech. She was lost in one of the first few battles when the war started. When the Decepticons first hired us. Selena and AMY looked away, while Trouble just stared at Scorcher, listening. Blade and his men had her surrounded, and we had to pull out of the combat zone. The mission was to rescue a con by the name of Vortex. He was shot down while scouting and couldn't ult out of the area. We saved him, but lost TECH. And so began the long saga of the engineer replacements in Out Squad, which eventually lead to you? Selena picked up where Scorcher left off. Scorcher turned away from his troops and looked out of the dropship once more, spotting a familiar-looking mountain formation. None of that matters now. We're here, Scorcher said, seeing a portion of the mountain shifting, revealing a hangar embedded in the mountain itself. The three other members of Scorcher's squad moved to look out and watched as the Cybertronian landscape altered to reveal not just the hangar, but as well as a plethora of turrets scanning the skies. How have these wardens stayed under the radar for so long? I'm almost certain that either the Decepticons or Autobots would have discovered this base and either destroy or try and recruit the whole group, Selena said, looking up to Scorcher, who was looking down at her, his metal face showing no emotion. Who's to say they haven't? He simply replied, looking to one of the turrets which began tracking the dropship they were currently in. These guns are a hell of a deterrent, and tend to leave no survivors. Selena's face went grim, and she turned to focus on the turret and watched it until it vanished behind the hangar walls. The dropship landed and the savages that came to collect them focused on Scorcher, expecting him and his team to disembark first. Scorcher sighed, looking to Selena, AMY, and Trouble. Come on, I know where we're expected to go. Scorcher stepped off of the dropship and began walking to a threshold that led deeper into the mountain as the mountain face began sealing shut, leaving only the artificial light as a source of illumination in the hangar. The three bots looked to one another before following Scorcher as well as the large warden that had addressed the four bots when they went to pick them up. The doors opened and the five bots went deeper into the warden's stronghold, not wanting to keep Warlord waiting. The five walked quietly in the halls of this base, doors closed and showing that they were not allowed to enter. While they knew Scorcher knew the way, it seemed like they were making sure he would not deter from the path. The three members of his squad remained quiet, trying to avoid optical contact with the large warden that followed the four members. Scorcher turned his head to look at the large brute. Does Warlord truly have such little faith in me? I know where the command center is, I don't need the paths blocked, Raider. The large bot did not shift his gaze, looking forward. Warlord would not want you to get lost in conversation. Your next assignment is already prepared and he needs for you and your team to be ready. Raider responded, looking to a closed-off passage that lead to the cells. Raider knew who filled them, and Scorcher knew as well. He made no comment on it, simply turning and focusing on the large door that they were approaching. The five members reached the door, seeing that the command center was more of a treasure room, different treasures from all across Cybertron hanging on the walls and covering the floor. A large throne made of crystallized energon sat in the middle of all of these riches, and behind that throne, standing over a large table stood a mountain of a bot, wearing a metallic cloak. Raider hit the hilt of his battle axe on the floor, causing the man to turn. His plating was a deep dark green, and his optics shined blue. The Goliath turned and moved to the throne, walking past it and looking down at Scorcher. Selena was astonished. She always thought Megatron and Scorcher were the largest bots on Cybertron, but this Warlord towered over Scorcher. Warlord's face curved into a smile. Welcome back, my most successful agent, he said, patting Scorcher on the back. Scorcher did not acknowledge it, simply letting Warlord pat his back. Once the brother was done, Scorcher focused on his larger brother. He had grown since the last time he'd been here, making him wonder what exactly Warlord had been up to. Yeah, tell me what my next assignment is, Scorcher demanded, the smile on Warlord's face disappearing. Warlord turned around and moved to his throne, falling into it and causing the whole room to shake, some of the treasure mounds shifting. Sentinel Prime has paid a high price for my best man, and I intend to deliver, Warlord said, his brotherly facade vanishing and replaced with the tone of a boss. Scorcher's face, as well as the rest of his squad's faces, showed shock. The Autobots? We just spent the last 100 cycles killing them. Now we're going to work for them? Are you insane? Scorcher shouted, getting Raider to shift from his stationary position. Warlord raised his hand, getting Raider to return to his passive form. You and your team will go, or I will have to replace Selena with a more loyal agent. This threat went over Selena's head, but Scorcher understood the true implications of this threat. Sir, what is he talking about? If there is a better agent for this mission, I will gladly dash. No, Scorcher shouted, causing Selena, as well as AMY and Trouble to jump. Scorcher turned back to face Warlord, who had a devious grin on his face. Scorcher knew exactly what would happen to Selena. The same thing that truly happened to TECH will go, brother, he stated before turning around to leave Warlord's chamber. The other three followed, still unsure of both this new mission and the previous encounter between their boss and Scorcher. Sir, Selena tried to inquire, only for Scorcher to shake his head. Not now, they're still listening. We need to get to Autobot territory before I begin to explain. The group began to pick up the pace as Scorcher did, seeing that this place was more of a hell for their leader. The four reached the hangar and moved to a dropship. No one was piloting it, and it had unique markings on it, markings similar to Scorcher's paint job. Is this your dropship? Trouble asked, studying the different weapons and unique shape of it. Get in, was all Scorcher replied with, hopping into the cockpit and starting the ship. The three complied and entered the passenger hold, watching as the hangar opened once more. Scorcher did not wait for the mountain face to open completely and flew out, leaving the home of the Wardens. The only thing he focused on was how far his great group had fallen. Chapter 9, The New Boss. Scorcher silently piloted the ship, focusing on getting to his destination. Selena, AMY, and Trouble sat quietly in the passenger compartment, trying not to say anything. Scorcher said that the Wardens were supposed to be the ancient guardians of Cybertron, and even if they had become nothing more than mercenaries, they would have thought they were more like them and less like savages. Selena could tell that something was off, a deeper feeling of concern filling her. She got up and slowly made her way to the cockpit, looking through the small threshold that separated Scorcher from his team. Scorcher could hear Selena coming and let out a sigh, turning his head slightly to look at her. "Come in and close the airlock," was all he said to her. She followed his command, stepping into the cockpit fully and closing the door behind her, leaving only the two there. Scorcher tapped a few commands and the vessel began piloting itself, allowing him to turn in his seat. "What do you need?" Selena took a seat in the co-pilot's chair and composed herself. "So could you explain to me what happened to the Wardens? When I pictured them in my mind, I thought they would be more like you and less like..." She stopped, looking away sheepishly. "Like Blade? Like savages?" Scorcher finished her thought, his voice cutting through the space between them. She nodded, focusing her attention back onto him. "Well, it's thanks to my brother, Warlord. We were both in line for succession, but I was out doing my own thing before the head warden, our progenitor, ceased operating. Since I was not there to take his place, Warlord took it, and that's when our group began its descent," Scorcher explained. Selena sat quietly, listening to Scorcher. "The reason our path was so guided when we went in there is because behind those doors are the true Wardens that didn't particularly care for Warlord's rule. They're either shut down or in the process of shutting down. Those Wardens that came to get us are little more than savages. I'm surprised the Autobots even dealt with him." Scorcher turned in his seat, facing the world that they were passing. Selena looked forward as well, unsure of what to say to her friend. She looked forward and became shocked. She tapped Scorcher on his shoulder, causing him to look up as well. They were both captivated by the city's beauty. Iacon City, the golden city of Cybertron. Well, most of it. The border of the city was seeing some action with Decepticon drones poking at its defenses, trying to break through. The valiant warriors of the Autobots fought back the horde of Decepticons, using their personal weapons or one of the many cannons lining the border wall. Spotting some turrets behind the wall, Scorcher sighed and took control once more. "Either strap yourself in or go back there and do so. It may get rough," Scorcher said, hearing the safety restraints locking around Selena. He opened the door remotely and told the two back there to buckle up, which they did. The surface turrets began to unload streams of plasma up towards Scorcher's ship, trying to knock the unidentified vessel out of the air. Scorcher maneuvered chaotically, making it harder for the bots to track him easily. Unfortunately, during his unique form of dodging, he flew right into one of the paths, knocking out his engines. Scorcher gripped tightly, trying to control where exactly they crashed, which just so happened to be the command center for the entire city. "Well, I guess we won't have to walk far," Scorcher said, groaning as the controls fought against his grip. "Hold on." Bumblebee and Cliffjumper were walking side by side, the two scouts looking identical save for their paint jobs. They were casually heading for the chamber of the primes when something crashed in their path, destroying the massive window and blocking the way. Both bots pulled their rifles out, slowly approaching the ship. "Is it a con?" Cliffjumper asked, staying behind Bumblebee slightly. Bee leaned closer to the ship, trying to look into the cockpit with no success. "Not sure. Don't see any markings." Suddenly there was pounding against the hull and Bee backed away, raising his rifle. Cliff did the same, backing up a little more so Bee could stand next to him. Cliffjumper probably should have stood farther apart, for the hull that was being beaten flew off, slamming right into Cliffjumper and knocking him to the floor. Bee looked back and saw Cliff getting pinned under that section of the hull before turning around to see a massive hammer. He waited to see the ugly con who was holding the weapon, but when a sleek and slim bot walked out, her arm shrinking back to normal size, he lowered his weapon. The next person out was someone Bee could have pinned as a con, but since there were no markings he kept his weapon lowered. Another slim bot, then a larger red bot. When the red bot came out, Bee immediately raised his weapon once more. Scorcher. Scorcher raised his revolver as well, putting the two in a little standoff. In the middle, Scorcher smiled, but then his attention was past Bee, onto the large bot easily picking the hull plating off of Cliffjumper. The bot looked over and was stunned as well for a moment before slowly approaching the group. "Scorcher?" the bot asked, moving next to Bee and lowering his weapon. Bee threw it back up, aiming straight for Scorcher's faceplate. "He's a con, train track," Bee shouted, keeping his eyes on Scorcher. "Was a con. Now I'm working for you guys," Scorcher corrected, holstering his weapon. Bee's face simply became confused, tilting his head. "He's a merc. So was I before his brother took over our group," Train Trek said, walking up to Scorcher. Train Trek was a large bot, a head taller than Scorcher and almost 2 times his size. The behemoth extended his hand to Scorcher, who looked back at Train and took it. "It's been a long time. So, where's Sentinel Prime?" Scorcher asked, letting go of Train Trek's hand. "Missing, so you'll be meeting with his successor," Train said, walking past Scorcher and putting his hands on the ship. Scorcher and his team just crashed. With a mighty heave, Train pushed the wreck out of the way, sending it falling to the surface. Revealing the rest of the path, the group saw 3 bots standing in their path, 1 bulky red bot, 1 sleek and lithe bot, and 1 red and blue bot standing between the two. The middle bot crossed his arms, glaring at Scorcher. Hey, Optimus. Scorcher rubbed the back of his head. Optimus continued to glare at Scorcher, his faceplate moving to reveal his mouth. You do know you could have just radioed in, right? Chapter 10, A New Look. Optimus, Jazz, and Ironhide lead the new members of the Autobots, Scorcher, Selena, AMY, and Trouble. Bumblebee and Cliffjumper brought up the rear of this small group, while Traintrack walked alongside Scorcher and his unit. The old ally of Scorcher looked down upon him as if he was studying him. Scorcher looked up. Yo, Train, is there a problem? I just realized you've been wearing the same plating ever since I've met you. Don't you get tired of looking the same? He asked, his metal face contorting to physically express his curiosity. Scorcher looked at his arms, now seeing the wear and tear the years have been giving his armor. The once vibrant crimson plating was now chipped and faded, revealing its age. Scorcher whistled as he spotted every blemish and mark, surprised he hadn't noticed them before. It never bothered me before, but I suppose I could use a tune-up. He chuckled nervously. He looked to his 3 teammates, seeing that they were still dressed in Decepticon colors. I guess we could all use a tune-up and such. We are no longer cons after all, we would stand out here. Scorcher heard Trek grunt in approval. Hey, Optimus, mind if the newbies take a slight detour? Wouldn't want any of our trigger-happy bots to try and take pot shots at them now, would we? He asked, giving the leader of the Autobots a hearty laugh. Optimus turned around, studying the 4 that were the topic of Trek's request. I see no issue with that. Just bring Scorcher to the council once he's through. Bumblebee and Cliffjumper, you watch over his teammates. Optimus commanded before turning around and leaving the others behind. Scorcher and Traintrack shrugged, looking to one another. All right, big guy, lead the way. The group made their way to what looked like an armory, with a few Autobots checking and cleaning weaponry. The 7 made their way to a desk where a thin feminine bot sat, studying what appeared to be a slab of stone. As the group closed in, Scorcher caught a glimpse of the slab and barely made out writing on it. It was clearly not Cybertronium, as the writing was too small, even for the smaller bots he had encountered, and as far as Scorcher knew, there were no rocks on Cybertron. Everything on the planet was made from metal. Traintrack reached the desk and cleared his throat, catching this bot off guard. She jumped and looked at the group, recomposing herself when she saw Track. Hello, Traintrack, how may I be of assistance? Oh, you're, She looked at a list, trying to search for something. She smiled when she did, turning back to Track. Your steam stack cannon is fully repaired. Traintrack seemed to light up when she said that, making all of the other bots in the group look at him peculiarly. Bee and Cliff looked at him strange because Traintrack seemed excited about something, while the 3 members of Scorcher's team looked at him because they were surprised that such a large bot could act that way. The only large bots they had encountered were either stoic and quiet or on the verge of ripping them apart. Scorcher simply smiled, having noted that a large part of Trek had been missing, and that was his iconic steam stack. He usually had it strapped against his back, which gave him some more height, but the stack was his own arsenal. Thank you, Lithe, but that's not why we're here. We brought you these 4 fine bots here so they could get freshened up and receive new looks in the case of those 3. Train pointed at Trouble, AMY, and Selena. The bot known as Lithe looked over the desk, seeing the group of new bots. She nodded, looking back at Traintrack. Sure, I'm sure we have some. She looked back behind her. Spare parts. Traintrack and Scorcher figured out what she meant, but the other 5 couldn't catch on. These spare parts were actually the fallen Autobots that were being recycled to replace the parts of those that survived. Some of the parts were the Decepticon drones that continuously attacked the gate. She walked away from the desk and went to a door, opening it and revealing a table of sorts. So who's going first? She looked at the group, and Scorcher and his team looked to one another. I guess I'll go first. To make sure this isn't a trap, Scorcher said, slowly approaching Lithe and the room. He entered the room and was followed by Lithe. The 2 were alone in the room, and Lithe moved to the table. Please lay down on here. It will be fast, Lithe said, gesturing to the table. Scorcher shrugged and complied, laying on the table flat. He rustled slightly before feeling a sharp piercing in his neck. He flinched, but then began feeling low on power. He saw the form of Lithe hover over his vision. Her voice was somewhat hazy and distant. Don't worry, it's just to numb you during the procedure, was all Scorcher could catch before he blacked out. Scorcher slowly began to feel his systems reactivate, and began to stir on the table. He heard the sound of tools being put away and looked towards the sound, seeing Lithe. She turned around and smiled. Congratulations, you officially look like an Autobot. Now Hound won't try and psych you out. She gave him a smile. Scorcher shook his head to try and get the haziness to go away and saw a reflective surface. He stood up and studied his new form. While he had been altered slightly, he looked relatively the same. Fresh crimson armor, no damage or anything. Scorcher took another look at himself, seeing that his body type was similar to Optimus' body, just less angular and more smooth. He also noticed the strange metal curtain that was around his waist, like the bottom half of a trench coat. Scorcher was about to comment, but the door slid open, showing off his new look to his group. Is that Scorcher? Selena asked, squinting her eyes. It sure looks like him. Nice new look, AMY commented, giving him a thumbs up. If it wasn't for that iconic red, I would have thought it to be a new bot. Trouble commented, crossing his arms over his chassis as he looked at Scorcher. Scorcher shook his heel, walking out of the room. Come on guys, quit it. One of you is going in now, he said, approaching train track. I believe we have some primes to speak to. Lead the way, friend. Scorcher said, nodding at his old friend. Train track nodded back, walking away from the group. Watch over them Cliff. Once they're done, bring them to the chamber. The two scouts nodded, and the two friends began walking out of the armory. Just before they left, Scorcher turned to his teammates. I'll see you guys soon. They nodded in return, and Train and Scorcher left the armory and began walking down the hall towards Council of Prime. Chapter 11, The Council of Primes. Train Track and Scorcher walked down the halls of the spire, the sounds of battle faint yet ever present as the Autobots defending Iacon defend against a slow constant stream of Decepticon drones. The two friends walked in silence as they headed for the council, the tension in the air sharp enough to cut energon. Finally, as they turned a hall and saw the large doors that lead to the Prime's chamber, Train Trek spoke. So, are any of us still active at the base? I assume you had to go there to report to Warlord, he said, not wanting to look at Scorcher. Scorcher's metal lips made a scraping sound, vocalizing his displeasure towards the topic. No, most of the wardens I saw were his savage goons. I didn't see any shells, though, so I assume our brothers in arms are being held prisoner within their quarters or something similar to that. Scorcher explained, trusting Train Trek enough to openly speak about the warden base. He would have to tell his three teammates eventually, but right now, they should be focusing on integrating with the Autobots. I'm certain that Warlord is toying with them one at a time, though, because his second-in-command looks more bulkier than his lesser, and some of his armor looked eerily familiar. Scorcher saw Trek physically tense up when he heard this, both knowing what that meant. That poor warden did not die in glorious combat to say the least. We'll discuss that later. For now, Train Trek shook his head, raising his hands as they approached the door. He pushed on the double doors, the large object slowly swinging outwards, allowing Scorcher and Train Trek to see the massive chamber where the Council of Primes resided. The main figure that stared at them as the door opened was a blue and gold Autobot with an orange face and bright blue eyes, a red light glowing on his forehead. This was the head of the council, Zeta Prime. Scorcher looked forward and saw Optimus standing in the center of the room, a bright light shining down on him. He looked back and saw the two, raising his hand. Train Trek stopped, stepping to the side and allowing Scorcher to move along, standing at Optimus' side. The Primes looked down at the two, studying Scorcher. Zeta leaned forward, his eyes squinting as he looked over the red bot leaning back in his seat. The head Prime spoke. Scorcher, we have hired you for a specific purpose. It is not to fight the Decepticons, although I believe that you know that was part of the agreement. Scorcher nods to this comment, his attention on Zeta as the Prime spoke, but to search for Sentinel Prime, we have need of his expertise, and with him having vanished a few cycles ago, we are weakened. Optimus will inform you on this mission further. Zeta then waved to the two, commanding them to leave. Optimus bowed slightly before walking away while Scorcher gave the head Prime a glare before following Optimus. The two, including Trek when they walked by him, left the chamber, the doors shutting behind them. After walking for a bit, Optimus turned to face Scorcher and Trek. All right, Train Trek, since I trust you more than our new recruits, you'll be joining him on his mission to watch over him. Barrage will also join you. I hope 2 extra troops will not interfere, Scorcher. Optimus shifted his glance to focus on Scorcher, who gave no response in return. There is a ship docked to act as your base of operations. It should be well armed enough for a mercenary such as yourself. Optimus continued. That's wonderful, but could you give me information regarding to the actual mission? Scorcher said, a hint of impatience in his voice. Optimus looked back at Scorcher, the tension between the two growing larger. The tension broke when the spire was attacked once more, sending the three falling to the floor due to the unexpected impact. The wall they were standing next to had been demolished, opening the hall to the furious battle that lay down on the surface. The Decepticons had broken through using a massive push in their assault, and the streets of Iacon were flooding with Decepticons. The three quickly got up and readied their weapons, Optimus' arm turning into a neutron rifle, Scorcher pulling out his 2 revolvers, performing a short flourish before readying them, and Train Trek prepared a large shield and hammer made out of the steam stack he had collected earlier. Let's talk about Sentinel later and focus on the current situation, Scorcher commented, getting a short grunt of agreement from the other two. The three then ran down the hall, heading to the lift to join the fray. Chapter 12, Iacon Defense. Scorcher, Train Trek, and Optimus ran off of the lift as the doors slid open, struggling as they had been damaged due to the battle. Shockingly, there were Decepticon forces fighting the Autobots right on their position, Autobot bodies lying deactivated all over the main lobby of the spire. The three move into action. Optimus knelt down and focused his aim, unleashing a stream of fire towards the entrance, taking out the Decepticon drones. Train Trek approached the last remaining Autobots that had not perished and swung his hammer, knocking away the Decepticons that were bearing down on them. The drones that had taken his hammer broke apart, their limbs and internal mechanisms scattering the floor. Train raised his shield as some drones opened fire on the Autobots, protecting the injured them. Get out of here. Get somewhere safe, he commanded, the soldiers that were the least damaged nodding, moving to assist their more injured allies. Train Trek returned his focus towards the drones, lifting his hammer and slamming it down, crushing 2 drones beneath the head. Scorcher was less focused on saving the Autobot soldiers and more focused on blasting the drones. He fired each revolver simultaneously, hitting the processing centers of every drone, taking out 2 at a time. He was slowly moving forward, taking out a large group of drones and clearing the lobby. The few drones that Scorcher and Optimus had not taken out yet began to fall back, running away from the 3 formidable foes and back out towards the streets of Iacon. With the lobby cleared, the 3 moved towards the doorway and looked out towards the streets to see the chaos. Autobot civilians laying dead, having been slain by the drones. Flyers swerving through the city, dueling in the sky, with those not paying attention crashing into the city that they're battling in. Optimus looked towards Scorcher and Train Track, his arm shifting back to a normal hand. You two go try and defend the wall and secure the breach. I'm going to try and take control of the streets once more. Before the 2 could try and reply, the Autobot jumped and transformed into a red and blue truck, driving off. The 2 looked to one another and shrugged, running towards where the main breach was. Scorcher jumped into the air, his limbs collapsing and his body shifting into a small red vehicle. Train Trek's transformation was less spontaneous, his body shifting as he stomped behind. His steam stack slowly shifted to where his head was, steam slowly rising from the spout. His bulky body became a long rectangular vehicle that Scorcher couldn't label. He had never seen a vehicle like it on Cybertron. Now was not the time to question. However, there was a battle that needed winning. The 2 rushed through the city, Train Trek wrecking any drone in his way by running them down. The streets of Iacon were devastated. The civilians who called the city home lay dead on the ground, alongside the soldiers who were meant to protect them. The Decepticons are becoming more and more about destruction. Finally the 2 reached the wall where the Decepticon forces were flooding in through. Autobot soldiers trying to push them back and secure the hole, the drones fighting to keep their entrance, only being replaced by a new drone when one fell. The Autobots had no such advantage. When one fell, there was no replacement once the body dropped. Scorcher and Train Track shifted into a walking stance and pulled out their weapons, Scorcher firing his revolvers while Train Track prepared his cannon, the weapon replacing most of his right arm. A small handle popped out, and he grabbed it, pulling it once to warm up the blast. The remaining Autobots saw the reinforcements, and say that the weapon was charging up, clearing the breach. The drones, believing they won, began to flow through once more. Now would be a real good time to use that thing, Scorcher said, only able to shoot so many drone heads. Train Track did not reply, only focused on the indicator that said his cannon was almost ready. Once it was, Train Track smiled, and pulled the handle again. The barrel of his cannon lit up like the sun, drawing the gaze of all the drones in its path. Almost as fast as their focus shifted, a large beam of light disintegrated them, clearing the whole horde that lay behind the breach. A large swath cut the Decepticon forces now, the battleground now deafening silent. The Autobots took advantage and rallied, forcing the Decepticons along the wall to retreat. Scorcher looked to Train Track, who looked as if he was about to fall. Every joint on his body released a cloud of steam, and he fell to the ground, landing on his knee. Scorcher holstered his pistols and moved to help his old-time friend. I don't remember it doing that, Scorcher commented, removing the cannon from Trek's arm and lacing it on his back. Train Trek simply laughed, his voice tired and drained. Well, it's been some time since you last saw it at work, friend. Perceptor has been toying with it, modifying it into the devastating weapon you see before you. Train Trek muttered, letting Scorcher help him stand. He's still trying to find a way for me to use it without draining most of my power, but obviously, he hasn't figured it out yet. That's obvious, Scorcher says, hearing the fighting continue in the city itself. He looked up to see a vessel getting shot by one of the city defense towers. Looks like their air support is done for. With that comment, Train Trek looked up to see what Scorcher was talking about, almost to fall over in shock. That is no Decepticon ship, that's Omega Supreme? The Decepticons are trying to take him down to gain access to the Omega Key. He wants the Train Trek fell over, coughing. Scorcher helped him sit up and placed him along a wall. I can tell this Omega Supreme is important. I'll go and try to defend him, Scorcher said, trying to relax his friend. Train Trek nodded, trying to catch his breath, and with that, Scorcher ran off, transforming and heading to wherever Omega Supreme would crash. Chapter 13, Fallen Supreme. Scorcher drove through the now dying battlefield of Iacon, the bodies of fallen Decepticons and Autobots scattered across the roads. The surviving Autobot soldiers were cleaning up their fallen brethren, dragging their bodies out of the way and laying them down, while piling the Decepticon bodies up into mounds. Scorcher was more focused on the falling Autobot ship, which Train Trek addressed as a bot itself instead of just a ship. Omega Supreme. If his name was supposed to be an indication of his power, he certainly wasn't showing it, although Scorcher didn't see him fight previously. Perhaps it was mostly Omega Supreme and its power that truly won the battle, and the Decepticons took advantage of a weakened warrior. He had no time to contemplate on why Supreme was going down. All he knew was that he should get there before any Decepticons reach him. Just then, something began raining hell down on Scorcher's position, trying to blow him off of the road. Scorcher avoided the explosions, jumping and shifting back into his robot form. He landed on his knees, sliding along the road for a moment while looking up to see the hostile who just tried to vaporize him. There in his sight, hovering above the street, was the con covered in white, blue, and red plane he did not particularly care for. The so-called second in command of the Decepticons, Starscream. Traitor, you will pay for abandoning Lord Megatron. His annoying voice yelled out, causing Scorcher to sigh as he pulled out one of his revolvers. This was a nuisance, something Scorcher should have taken care of back when Warlord recalled him for his new assignment. Starscream always screamed trouble to Scorcher, always grinding his gears the wrong way. The two aimed their weapons at one another, Starscream's arm blasters locking into position as he hovered in the air, Scorcher's fingers on the triggers. Scorcher grunted. I ain't a traitor, Star, I'm a merc. My allegiance is to the highest bidder, unlike you, who swapped sides the moment Megatron came knocking. Scorcher could see Starscream's face twist in displeasure, and the con screamed, opening fire. Shut up. The whelp yelled, lowering to the ground as he fired upon Scorcher. Scorcher moved as soon as the first blast came out of Starscream's weapons, firing his revolvers back at the con. Scorcher ran towards cover, avoiding Starscream's rain of destruction. Taking cover behind a wall, Scorcher could feel the wall begin to break apart from Starscream's blast rounds, the vibrations pressing against his back. There was a momentary break in the fire and Scorcher took the chance, looking past the wall and firing the remaining charge in his revolvers. Starscream had began taking cover when Scorcher fired and one of his wings got winged, a small hole forming where the Decepticon symbol had been. The coward yelped in pain, and vanished behind his cover. Scorcher took cover once more, popping open his revolvers to reload. I would run away if I were you, Scream. Scorcher said as he inserted a charge into one, failing to hear the scream of the Decepticon's engines as he flew away. Once Scorcher loaded the second revolver, he moved out of cover to fire only to see that Starscream had retreated already. Shaking his head, Scorcher holstered his weapons and jumped, transforming into his vehicle form and heading for the crash site. Starscream had stalled him, and now Omega Supreme would surely be surrounded by cons now. Scorcher slowed down as the surrounding city showed signs of destruction, Decepticons more focused on healing their wounded rather than taking care of Scorcher. Scorcher heard the conflict across a raised wall, something Scorcher assumed was once the floor, raised due to Omega's impact. He shifted into a walk and pulled a revolver out, ready to shoot the first con he saw around Omega Supreme. What he saw however was not something he expected. Omega Supreme kneeling over a battlefield, a massive hole in his chest. Megatron, Soundwave, and Breakdown slowly moved over to the defeated Cybertronian. Omega Supreme's internal shield is down. Use the Dark Energon to corrupt him. Soundwave's synthetic voice echoed within the makeshift arena. I know what to do, Soundwave. Be silent, or face my wrath. Megatron replied, his chassis looking more purple than Scorcher remembered. It looked like there were purple spikes protruding from random places on the Decepticon, showing a form of instability. Suddenly, Megatron raised his arms and pushed his hands forward, a beam of purple smashing into Omega Supreme's chest. Large glowing purple crystals began to form on Omega's chest and joints, his lights flickering as the corruption spread. He fell over and twitched as the Dark Energon completed its work. Systems, failing. Corruption, total. Omega's voice echoed into the air as the Dark Energon filled his body. Megatron began to laugh as he approached his new tool. The Autobots' most powerful weapon and the key to the core of Cybertron are mine. Megatron yelled, jumping onto Omega Supreme. Scorcher could hear faint cheering from outside of the makeshift arena, Decepticons cheering for their powerful overlord. The universe shall hear my name and tremble. Megatron proclaimed into the sky, fists raised in determination. Scorcher raised his weapon, ready to blast Megatron's head off, but failed to see that Soundwave had approached him, firing an experimental weapon at Scorcher. The merc could not react in time, getting hit with this strange device. Scorcher felt a surge throughout his entire body and fell over, darkness overtaking him. Chapter 14, into the static fray. Scorcher slowly felt his optics spring to life, revealing his surrounding. He attempted to get up, but felt that his entire frame was extremely heavy, as if the entire Decepticon army was on his back. His audio receptors were going haywire, and once he finally could see, what he saw made no sense. The world that surrounded him was covered in violent black and white lines. The only thing that stood out of that chaotic world was a strange circle. Scorcher struggled to keep concentration, the static surrounding him driving him mad. He slowly staggered towards the circle to try and get a more clear view, the static around him growing louder as he moved. He covered his audio receptors, grinding through the pain this static was causing him and continuing towards the circle. He attempted to focus on the circle, seeing the shape clear up a little and seeing that it was not a full circle, but rather it broke off at the bottom and split into two lines. It reminded Scorcher of one of the symbols a scout had brought back from a scouting mission into space. He had said that those symbols were that of one of the languages of a civilization they scouted. He said that the people were humans and that this specific symbol was the final letter in their lexicon, Omega. Just then, a small figure appeared in the static, standing out by becoming a pure black figure against the chaos. Scorcher focused on this being, which looked like it had limbs, but he couldn't tell due to all of the pain this static was causing. Scorcher fell to his knees, groaning in pain as the loud static burrowed into his mind. The shadowy figure stopped in front of the Cybertronian, and Scorcher could see this being shake his head. Y lambda sigma sigma lambda dy y sigma. B. Then it walked away, and the figure and the Omega faded into the static. Scorcher yelled as the static consumed him. Chapter 15, Prime Lost. Scorcher blinked himself awake, seeing the area where Omega Supreme and Megatron once were. He was back in reality, the signs of battle lingering around him. He wasn't sure how long he had been inactive, and was eager to find his squad and employers. He staggered back up to his feet and stumbled out of the arena, the static still toying with his sensors. Scorcher looked towards the direction he came, seeing the bodies lying about. Autobots cleaning the streets of the Decepticon bodies and piling them up, and organizing the fallen Autobots and recording who was lost during the most recent battle. He then spotted a familiar figure, standing firmly with her legs side by side, hands holding onto a datapad, and spectacles resting on her smooth face place. Her armor plating was much more vibrant than previously, a mix of orange and red running up and down her body. Selena looked towards Scorcher's and almost dropped her pad. Boss. She ran away from what she was doing, leaving an Autobot medic to continue where she left off. She stopped in front of Scorcher, grabbing his face and checking for any damage. What happened? You look like you were in a rough fight, she asked, focusing on Scorcher's optics, seeing a strange flicker. Scorcher shut his eyes, waving off her concern. I'm fine, Selena, just ran into a horde of cons. Where's Optimus? I need to find him. Selena let her hand drop from his face and looked to her datapad. Optimus and his team just re-entered the tower. Apparently Zeta Prime is missing in action. Also, the Council wants to inform you of the details for your mission. Scorcher nodded, looking past Selena and towards the street. Thank you, Selena. Keep helping these guys out. I'll be back to get you when it's time to move out, Scorcher said, patting her on the shoulder before transforming into his car form and rolling out towards the tower. Selena watched him drive off, holding the spot he had patted for a moment before moving back to account the fallen. After a short drive, Scorcher arrived at the base of the tower, seeing a rather large pink Cybertronian moving bodies. She wasn't being delicate about it, either, tossing them into piles and out of the walkways. The pink Cybertronian turned and Scorcher couldn't believe who it was. AMY.M.Y's face became shocked as well when she saw Scorcher and moved forward. AMY used to be slightly shorter than Scorcher and similar to Selena's build, light frame and delicate. A.M.Y's new chassis looked like she could throw Scorcher halfway across Cybertron without breaking a bolt. She walked up and placed her hands on Scorcher's shoulders, squeezing them tightly. Scorcher could hear the creaking of his shoulders as her hands almost crushed them. Scorcher, they gave me an awesome upgrade. Now I can carry a lot more weapons. A.M.Y's voice beamed with excitement. Scorcher nodded, trying to free himself out of her grasp. He finally broke free, and AMY could see the damage she had done. Scorcher simply rolling his shoulders, not seeing the indentations she had left. I can see, you look much more intimidating. Glad to see they could help you out. He collected himself, looking to the lift. Trouble still getting outfitted. She nodded, smiling a little. He looked very shocked to see me come out looking taller than him. It was a sight. She slowly moved back to moving the bodies. You'll probably run into him up there. She did not wait for a response, focusing back on her task. Scorcher did not reply, simply nodding. He moved to the lift and called it, waiting for it to arrive. At least he's alive, Scorcher thought to himself, remembering how by now the engineers of their squad usually dropped. The ding which notified the arrival of the lift chimed and Scorcher walked on, activating the lift to go to the level where the council was. He stood still as the lift moved up, thinking on whatever had happened to him when encountering Megatron and his gang. What did he shoot me with? Looked like no weapon I've ever seen. That place too. Thinking about where he went caused Scorcher to suffer slightly, the noise that filled that realm becoming a small echo in the back of his mind. The lift arrived at the desired level and it was live with Autobot activity. Understandable since the city was just attacked. Hopefully these freedom lovers will get their gears in order and turn this place onto a proper fortress instead of just a city. He joined the flow, squeezing past groups of Autobots that were either working in the halls or walking to their own destinations. Metal scraped against metal in the crowded hall, causing Scorcher to wince in annoyance. Where were all of these guys when the attack actually happened? He was dragged out of his train of thought when he saw Bumblebee standing in a relatively empty corridor. Scorcher moved out of the river of bodies to speak with the scout and moved towards him. B, where is Optimus? Scorcher asked, rubbing his shoulder. Bumblebee looked up from his datapad, his neutral expression shifting to that of displeasure. Why should I tell you? It's mighty coincidental that the Decepticons attack right as we hire someone who was just working with them. Scorcher could feel the hostility in B's eyes, and he saw his arm twitch a little, indicating that B was about to pull something if Scorcher didn't defuse the situation right away. Luckily, the door to their side opened, Optimus walking out. It is a coincidence, Bumblebee. What is a surprise is the size of the attack. I assure you, my friend, that our new ally had nothing to do with this attack. Megatron has been planning this since the attack on Trypticon Station. Hearing Optimus' words, Bumblebee seemed to calm down, although his glare on Scorcher did not falter. Optimus then turned to Scorcher, handing him a pad. The council ordered me to go rescue Zeta Prime, and to give this to you. Scorcher reached out and took it, looking at the somewhat damaged data pad. It holds the information of Sentinel's last location. I'm also assigning Train Trek to assist you. I would give you more, but we just can't spare the men. Scorcher looked over his shoulder to the hall, noting all of the bodies that just magically appeared, but he held his tongue. All right, Optimus, I'll make sure to bring Sentinel back. In one piece, hopefully, Scorcher said, walking away from the two Autobots and back into the mass of Autobots and attempted to move towards the lift. He activated his intercom, seeing that all of his troops were listening, including Train Trek. All right, guys, meet up at the base of the tower. We have a prime to track down. Chapter 16, an unexpected turn of events. Scorcher managed to return to the ground floor, seeing Selena and AMY standing near the entrance of the tower. He rolled his shoulders and approached them, grunting as he heard something pop. Selena and AMY turned to face him, Selena showing signs of concern seeing Scorcher grunting in pain. He was showing signs of illness earlier, and that pop should not have been there since Scorcher was somewhat young for a Cybertronian. Selena moved to Scorcher, stopping him in his tracks and placing a hand on his shoulders. Are you sure you're alright, Scorcher? We've been together for a while and this is all new. You showed no signs of malfunctioning while we worked with the Decept. Scorcher grabbed her hand and slowly removed it off of his shoulder. Selena, I'm alright, just got my wire crossed, it isn't a big issue. Selena gave Scorcher a concerned expression before sighing and lowering her arm. The lift doors opened and the three were introduced to Trouble, or at least they believed he was Trouble based on his physical features. Scorcher couldn't help but compare Trouble to Bumblebee, but where Bumblebee had some vibrant color on his plates, Trouble was completely blank, his plates as chrome as the day he was made. Trouble saw how his comrades were looking at him and groaned. I miss my older colors. He complained, looking to his shiny arms. AMY walked up to him, forcing him to look up to her. Yeah, but that would have caused some. She began, but Scorcher snapped his fingers, the ring causing all of them to look to him. No jokes, let's head out, he said, walking past everyone and out into the city. Selena, AMY, and Trouble followed, walking out to see train trek waiting for them. Behind the brawny tank was a rebuilt drop ship, no signs of crashing were present, which was great. The plating also looked fresh and new with Autobot insignias on the hull. Scorcher looked towards train track, an expression of bewilderment on his face. Track, old pal. He points to the Autobot markings. What in the name of the Allspark are those things doing on my ship? Train trek looks to the markings, waves at it and turns back to Scorcher. I mean if you want to get shot down by us, the Decepticons will shoot us down the moment we enter their zones. Scorcher retorted, his voice lined with aggression. Just mount up. We'll just shoot them before they get the chance. Train trek said, climbing up into the vessel. The four looked at their repaired ship then to Scorcher, who growled at the Autobot symbol. Scorcher then turned to his group. Well, go on in. Trouble, you pilot. AMY and Trouble nodded and moved into the dropship. Scorcher then handed the data pad to Selena. See what that says? Scorcher simply ordered, climbing into the ship and taking a seat near a terminal. Selena followed suit, climbing into the dropship as the engines roared to life. She sat down and activated the terminal. She had believed that since the Prime Council had given this to Scorcher that it would just have some info regarding Sentinel, but it was actually Sentinel's personal data pad. It was clocked and hand required some hacking into. Selena sighed, then smiled, for it had been some time since she got to hack into anything. Her finger shifted from a normal slender appendage into a small thin tool, inserting it into one of the slots of the pad. Suddenly there was a surge that flowed through her body, startling her, causing her to jump. This was good news, though, it indicated that she was connected, and a few short moments later, she was in. The datapad screen came to life, and Selena studied the information that flashed before her. As the dropship took off, the detail she noticed didn't make much sense to her. Boss, isn't this the location of our headquarters? That mountain we went to before coming to Iacon. She showed the information to Scorcher, who looked at the coordinated. He then grabbed the data pad out of her hand, her finger getting jerked out, sending another shock through her body. She rubbed her injured finger as Scorcher glared at the location. What does my brother have planned? Scorcher's hands began to crush the data pad, placing it in her lap and moving to the cockpit. Scorcher opened the door to see Trouble and train track conversing, stopping them and causing them to look towards him. Trouble, make a heading for the base. Since Warlord did not summon us, we'll have to sneak into the base. Trouble nodded, taking control of the ship and flying manually. Scorcher looked to AMY and Selena, who were focused on him. Prepare yourself, team, we're going straight into the fire. Chapter 17, Infiltration of the Mountain. Scorcher watched from the cockpit as the Warden Mountain came into view. The peaks of the mountain fell off, revealing large turrets which were rotating to face them. Trouble, fly closer to the ground. These turrets won't be able to track us down there. Trouble simply controlled the ship, the image of the mountain shifting, the turrets vanishing past the cockpit. The surface quickly approached, and Trouble leveled the ship's approach. Scorcher was worried for a moment, believing that Trouble was about to crash for a moment. Last time I saw this place, those turrets weren't there. Warlord's given your secret base some teeth, huh? Train Trek commented, looking back to Scorcher. Scorcher didn't give Trek a reply, because he was waiting for any other signs of defenses Warlord may have installed. The base of the mountain was quickly approaching with no signs of danger. Trouble, slow the ship down, and land it once you reach the base of the mountain. Trek, follow me, Scorcher said, leaving the cockpit and into the cabin. AMY and Selena looked up from what they were doing, Selena from reading a datapad, AMY cleaning off an ion displacer. Scorcher looked to the two then behind him, seeing that Train Track was waiting to hear his orders. Alright, so here is the plan. Trouble will stay with the ship to have it ready for a quick evac. Train Track and AMY will stay here until I give a signal to launch an assault. Train Track knows where the entrance is down here, so follow his lead AMY. AMY nodded to Scorcher's order. Once he saw that she understood, he continued. Selena and I will infiltrate through a secret entrance to try and get as deep as we can and disable any security we can. Scorch, pal, what will this signal be? Trek asked, crossing his arms. Scorcher gave Train Trek a sly gaze, causing Trek to grin as well. You'll know it when you see it. Train Trek nods, looking away after Scorcher answered his question. Scorcher then looked towards Selena, who was already on her feet. Stay behind me and try not to draw attention to yourself once we're in there, all right? Selena nodded, which Scorcher replied to with a nod. He felt the ship stop, and moved to the hatch. Train Trek, inform Trouble of what's what, and then you and AMY move into position. Trek nods and moves to the cockpit. Scorcher opened the hatch and he and Selena hopped out, landing on the ground with one of his weapons in hand. Scorcher took a look around his surroundings, looking for any of Warlord's wardens patrolling the mountain. He was surprised that he didn't even see any tracks to indicate there were patrols. Either these patrols weren't leaving tracks, or Warlord was cocky enough to not have patrols defending the perimeter, which felt like the correct option. Selena landed behind Scorcher and the two began moving away from the ship and towards the mountain. Once the two reached the mountain, Scorcher holstered his weapon and began feeling the face of the mountain, looking for something. Selena kept an eye out for any company that could possibly surprise them, but turned when Scorcher punched the wall and growled in frustration. Where the hell is it? He exclaimed as he focused back on the mountain. Sir, what exactly are you looking for? Selena asked, holstering her own weapon and closing the distance. Scorcher turned around and waved to the part of the mountain where he had just been. There is supposed to be a hidden panel here which allows us to open the secret passage. I have a feeling that Warlord may have destroyed it. He explained, fury visible on his face. Selena looked to the wall, and thanks to her modifications in her eyes, was able to see this hidden panel. It wasn't destroyed, but covered with extra plates. Selena held her hand out to Scorcher, catching his attention. Sir, may I use your sword for a moment? Scorcher, unsure of what she was going to do, gave her a questionable look. He then pulled the blade out and handed it to her. She gripped the handle and pointed it to the plates covering the panel and swung, cutting the extra metal and revealing the panel Scorcher was searching for. He looked at her and gave her a smile. Good work, Selena. He gently grabbed the sword and sheathed it, moving past her and inputting a few commands. Finally, a large portion of the wall slips away, revealing a dark tunnel that leads deeper into the mountain. Scorcher looked towards Selena and nodded to her, then began moving deeper into the dark. Chapter 18, The True Wardens. Scorcher and Selena slowly made their way through the secret entrance, making sure not to trip any other alarms Warlord may have set. Selena had a hand placed on Scorcher's shoulder as they made their way through, scanning the walls for any traps and stopping him when she spotted one. She would then carefully deactivate the trap and then they would move forward. Scorcher held his hand to the side of his head as the static briefly hindered his sight, filling the dark hall with white spots. Verbally groaning, this caught Selena's attention. Sir, we should get you checked out. Who knows what Soundwave did to you? Scorcher shook his head, his vision returning to normal. I'm fine, I'll check it out once the true wardens retake this mountain. He faced forward, seeing a light through the darkness. He moved forward until the room became visible, the shape of a large figure came into view. The two continued forward until they reached the threshold and entered the room, emerging into a large ancient decrepit hall. The large figure was a large warden, armored in an unfamiliar way to Selena, appearing to look as if they were the ways of old, where a certain few protected Cybertronians from the wild beasts of Cybertron and those who were stuck in the wild ways of the past. What is that statue? Selena asks, walking past Scorcher and studying the armored statue, focusing on the blade that it held. Scorcher moved past the statue and towards a sealed-off corridor, typing on the keypad. It is a depiction of a true warden. The armor is inspired off of an older human design. Selena turns her head to look at Scorcher. What is that? Scorcher stops typing, somewhat surprised at this revelation. Right, you're still somewhat young, he returns to his task. They are an organic species rather small, about the size of a glitch mouse compared to you and I. From what the scouts have told me, they are very intelligent and have leaped in regards of technology compared to when we saw them as that. The keypad lights up, and the door slowly creaks open, signs of rust visible where the doors interlock. As the doors slide open, Selena looks back to the statue, studying the blade and seeing a slight similarity with Scorcher's own sword. This blade looks familiar. Scorcher turns to see the blade, trying to focus on the statue's weapon and avoid the static that surrounds his peripheral vision. Yes, it does. The door opens completely, and he begins moving into the corridor. Selena follows soon after. Chapter 19, Rescue. Scorcher and Selena slowly made their way through the unused halls, the brown coloration covering the walls. Scorcher was disgusted by what he saw, seeing how Warlord had just abandoned the ancient sections of the base. All of this sacred ground left to rust. The Warden's previous leadership would execute Warlord for his atrocious actions. Suddenly there was a loud screeching noise which caused the two to stop moving forward. After a moment of waiting, they heard the screeching sound once again, which sent a chill down Scorcher's metallic spine. What is that? He heard Selena ask behind him, confirming that it wasn't just something the static was throwing at him. Well, from the sound of it, it sounds like the disassembly of a Cybertronian. Scorcher muttered, readying his revolvers. The two slowly approached the corridor where the sound seemed to be coming from, slowing their speed when the sound echoed out once more. When the two moved to the passageway, they saw what exactly was causing that noise. As they peered down the passageway, they were witness to one of the newer wardens tearing apart the deceased body of a true warden, their arms and legs torn off and thrown to the side, the floor pooling with the warden's internal liquids. Seeing one of his fellow wardens being slaughtered like this infuriated Scorcher, causing him to approach the savage warden. Selena attempted to stop him, but he was already halfway there when she moved. The savage turned around, alerted to the approaching being due to his footfalls. The hostile dropped what he was doing and grabbed the handle of his axe only for Scorcher to place the barrel of his weapon to his head and pull the trigger. The hostile warden dropped to the floor, his fluids mixing with that already on the floor. Scorcher glared at the savage with hatred, holstering his pistols and grabbing the axe of the enemy. Gripping the handle tightly, he swung the axe into the dead body, the grinding metal sound echoing out as the blade met the corpse. Selena approached the raging Scorcher as he shredded the enemy's body to bits. Selena, trying not to get hit with a recoiling swing, grabbed Scorcher's arm, stopping his onslaught. Scorcher turned violently, his blue eyes strangely changing to red. His whole face was twitching, and only looking to Selena did he seem to begin to relax. His face began to not twitch and his eyes slowly lost their red color and returning to normal. Dropping the axe suddenly, Scorcher pulled his arm away and moved past the bodies, entering a dark hall. Selena wanted to stop him, but she knew it would be useless. She followed, readying her weapon once more. Scorcher moved with purpose, walking past all of the chambers. Selena took a moment to look at the chambers and realized something. Each doorway was barred, and each room had many bodies in them. Some began to move as Scorcher stormed past. Selena increased her speed, catching up with Scorcher. The two were approaching a rather crude terminal. Scorcher walked up to this terminal and saw that it only had a few buttons on it. He growled, punching it and destroying the terminal. After the destruction, all of the cell doors slowly opened, and those who were alive walked out. Scorcher and Selena watched as the prisoners walked out, showing signs of energon deficiency. They need power, Selena said, preparing to share some of her power with the nearest one. No, Scorcher said, grabbing Selena's arm, stopping her. She turned in confusion, but her emotion quickly changed to fear after seeing Scorcher's hate-fueled expression. There are plenty of fresh bodies in the hangar these guys can siphon energy from. Scorcher readied his revolvers and turned, heading for a cleaner door. Selena shuddered at the thought, but prepped her weapon as well, following Scorcher. Some of the more stable wardens prepared their own weapons, creating blades from their armor and following the two saviors. Scorcher stopped in front of the panel for the door, inputting codes to open the passageway. He looked back and saw Selena as well as a few wardens behind him, ready to bring the pain on their captors. Scorcher grinned, and his eyes flickered as he pressed the confirm button. Chapter 20, Party Crasher. The savage wardens wandered around the main hangar, waiting for something to do, either for Warlord to send them on another raid or for something to try and attack the base. One group of raiders were laying around on containers of energon, grumbling about random stuff. One must have said something another did not care for, because moments later there was a brawl with a circle forming around the free entertainment. This new commotion prevented them from hearing one of the blocked-off doors crank open, their cheers and eager howls drowning out Scorcher's group. Scorcher and his group began to kill the savages that were away from the crowd, painting the hangar floor black. It was only after one of the wardens began approaching the crowd that some of them understood the gravity of the current situation. Some were still bloodthirsty and began attacking each other, while others grabbed their weapons to face the true threat that had emerged. Metal clashed against metal as the savages punched one another and the wardens grinded their blades against the savages' axes. Scorcher and Selena let the havoc continue, slipping past and up to the hangar command center. He knew that Warlord would only let those who were competent enough to be stationed in there, so he had to be ready to fight enemies that could actually fight back effectively. He and Selena took position on either side of the door, readying their blasters. Then Scorcher holstered the blasters, pulling his sword out. "We need to stay quiet or else our guys down there will have to fight more alerted soldiers," he explained, splitting his blade in two and giving one to Selena. She nodded, holstering her blaster and taking the blade. After a moment to prepare once more, Scorcher shoved his blade into the door, breaking the locking mechanism and forcing it to slide open. The guards within all jumped at the shrieking sound before turning to the direction of the door and seeing the two enter. They all responded, each grabbing their own weapon and preparing to duel. Scorcher was slightly disappointed because he had given these guys too much credit. These guards were about as dumb as those outside the room. He had thought one of them would at least pull a ranged weapon on them or sound the alarm, but all 6 of the savages here were charging. Scorcher rushed forward in response, running one through with his blade and ripping the axe out of his grip. Shoving the body away and into one who was heading for Selena, he threw the axe into the head of another, dropping the foe. Selena took the advantage Scorcher had provided and stabbed the stunned enemy in the neck, black fluids pouring out of the wound. She took the blade out and took the enemy's weapon, looking up to see Scorcher pinned, his blade holding 2 axes together, preventing the wielders from drawing back, and his free hand holding the blade of the final foe, metal grinding against each other as Scorcher struggled to hold the weapon back. Selena moved in, swinging the axe into the enemy on Scorcher's left, knocking him back and allowing Scorcher to take the axe and swipe it at the other 2, killing one and knocking back the other. The last 2 enemies were now growling and writhing, knowing that they were the only thing that stood between the hangar controls and Scorcher. They decided to use their CPUs and both rushed Selena. Her being smaller than the 2 of them made her a better target rather than Scorcher. Scorcher cut one down before he could get past him, but Selena was tackled. Both bodies crashed to the floor as she swung the blade at her assaulter. The savage let off a terrifying laugh before being cut off at the neck. His head fell next to Selena and his body went limp, pinning her to the floor. Scorcher grabbed the corpse and threw it off of his partner, offering her a hand once the body had landed. Still somewhat startled, she took his hand and was lifted up off the floor. Once these hangar doors open, we can go out, Scorcher said, holding his hand out, indicating that he wanted his other half of his sword back. Selena handed it to him, moving to one of the terminals and inputting commands. Scorcher looked out into the hangar, seeing that there were a lot of bodies littering the floor, and those wardens that had joined them were now working on the brawlers who were still too dense to see their allies being killed. Opening the mountain now, sir, Selena said, causing Scorcher to look to the hangar door. AMY, Trouble, and Train Track were waiting on the ship, looking out over the great metallic wasteland. AMY and Trouble were sitting on the side of the ship while Trek leaned against the hull, making the ship tilt slightly. Sir, why did this war even begin? Trouble said, addressing Trek. The large bot simple laughed, shifting his footing, making the ship rock back to a stationary position. I'm not that old, young one. If you want that, ask Optimus or Megatron, or even Scorcher, for that matter. Trek responded, pulling his hammer out to admire his weapon. Wait, Scorcher has been around since before the war. AMY added, leaning towards Trek, more so admiring the hammer as well. Yeah, that bot, well, let's say he saved me from going down a truly dark path. He put the head of the hammer against the metal surface of Cybertron and placed one foot on it, leaning against the grip. Those wild bots that live out in the wastes? Those that are corrupted by the dark energon. The two nodded, deeply interested in Trek currently. Well, I was close to becoming one. Both of their eyes widened as the words came out of his mouth, bringing a smile to Train's face. He opened his mouth to continue his tale, but the sound of the mountain opening up drew his attention. That story is going to have to wait, though. We have a mountain to storm, Trek said, grabbing his hammer and preparing himself. Trouble and AMY prepared themselves as well. The three began moving forward, heading for the opening.